Yeah, kind of. Can you guys say hi? Can you see them, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay, say hi, guys. Say it louder. Hi. All right. Well, they're there. I'm telling you, they're actually here. It's not just me.
Right on.
Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I'm be mindful of your time. So I already gave them a brief sort of overview of how we know each other. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Did you tell the truth?
Yeah. Okay. That's it. We're moving on. I told the truth. Always tell the truth. It's very important.
Great.
So, am I showing these correctly? I don't even know what's showing on my screen. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So let's start with, if you don't mind, telling them, maybe sharing a story with us that illustrates some of the excitement and challenges you face.
So many. Yeah. In terms of challenges, I mean, I think probably the key challenge for any PR person, whether you're working on an agency side or in-house, is really to educate and better align expectations, because in reality, your internal stakeholders are the ones who actually have the highest expectation for what we do as a discipline. And so a lot of where our PR is trending, and this may be touching on a topic we talk about in a little bit, but a lot of where PR is trending is figuring out how to more closely align to business practices, right? So it's no longer just, here's a piece of coverage, knock it out, drop it, end of the day, call it a day, right? So things like impressions are starting to lose a little bit of their luster, and it's more about how you're impacting the bottom line. So it's not just driving awareness, but also consideration on the part of the end consumer. And we can certainly talk about that in a little bit more depth. But so, effectively educating people that PR's primary constituent is actually media, whereas marketing people very much focus on the end consumer. So a lot of what we do as PR are craft stories to then try and engage with media to then subsequently amplify that to our key audience. So there are a couple of filters in the way of the message that we're trying to tell. So it's really about, again, educating what we do. We're PR practitioners. We're not magicians. We're not, we're not miracle workers. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is put products, services, et cetera, in the best position to succeed, more so than tell people exactly what to write. So there's always that editorial lens that we have to try and explain to any number of our constituents. So that at the end of the day, that's probably the biggest challenge. I mean, we're sort of blessed to be able to touch a lot of interesting things and to effectively be storytellers, right? So just in terms of excitement, at the end of the day, that is what we do. How do we tell stories that excite media, that end up exciting consumers about the product and service that you work on? Of course, there are going to be unique selling points. Of course, there are going to be various technical aspects that you're going to have to ultimately understand and explain. But it's really media, why should you cover this? Or consumers, why should you care about this at the end of the day?
So I have a quick question for you. When you say constitutes, do you use that interchangeably with the term publics?
Yes. Yes.
Strictly from an academic standpoint, we typically have the term public. I just wanted to clarify that just in case
yes.
questions about that. So
yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
I guess this kind of goes hand in hand. You already really answered this question in a way, but how would you describe public relations today as a profession, as an industry?
Yeah, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, but effectively, what public relations does is accumulates information, assimilates it, and describes it in a way that has meaning for media and your end user at the end of the day. I think the nature of what we do as PR practitioners is certainly changing with the democratization of information. So whether that be Twitter, Facebook, influencers, YouTube, any platform that you think of, before it was our job was primarily transactional. I have information, I give it to a journalist, the journalist reports it, job done. Now, given that almost anyone, if taken liberally, can be a journalist and information can be spread any number of ways, it's really thinking through strategically, what is the story that I want to tell? What is the message that I want to effectively get across at the end of the day? To whom do I want to communicate that message? And I think that that's probably the most important point, is effectively what is your audience and what do you want them to know, what do you want them to take away? And then what's the best vehicle for being able to tell that message, whether it's media, whether it's by an influencer, whether it's actually on an owned channel. There's certainly a move and proliferation towards owned channels. So, and by that I mean blogs that are published by the company themselves. So any kind of first party vehicle that you can leverage. So those are a lot of the tools at your disposal, not the least of which are the relationships that you build up with all of these various touch points, whether they be media or internal stakeholders as well. So I think in reality, a lot of what we now do as PR people is strategy and planning and parsing of audience, more so than just tactical execution, right? It's relatively easy to get a story in media. It's just, is that the right story at the right time, targeting the right person, and effectively positioning your product service executive in the way in which you want to.
Oh my gosh, you make it sound so easy. Oh, I think it's so much more fun now that's more strategic and more about strategy. And tactics are great, and of course tactics are fun, but right. I love strategy. So thanks for supporting that.
Yeah.
So my next question is, so there are some things I think that are unique to practicing public relations in entertainment or the video games industry specifically. Could you share some of that with them?
Sure. I think probably one of the more unique things in working in the field in which I do now and have in the past is you have a number of discrete products that you're looking to bring to market, right? So what that does is it opens up a ton of opportunities, not only for different strategies, different audiences, like I was talking about before, but it gives you an opportunity to touch a lot of different markets. So, for instance, if you're looking at the game industry, so 1 month you may be launching a role-playing game. The next month you may be launching a third-person action-adventure game. The next month you may be launching a first-person shooter. The next month you may be launching a downloadable product that's digital only. So if you think about all of those, the through line is we traditionally categorize them all as games. However, the audience is different, the strategies is different, the tactics are different at the end of the day. So you are effectively working on 4 or 5 different threads at once in some instances. So I think that changes a lot. I think what we're also finding too is audiences, I think for the better, are increasingly becoming discerning. So there are a ton of different outlets that you can look at to better assess, quality. Is this how I want to spend my money? One of the really interesting things from an entertainment standpoint and a video game standpoint is, yes, your competitors are your direct competitors, right? So from a PlayStation standpoint, for instance, right? So Xbox can be considered a competitor, or Nintendo can be considered a competitor, but also Netflix can be considered a competitor, iPhone can be considered a competitor, right? Because effectively you're competing for people's time. I think that is one of the interesting things as various platforms and technologies proliferate, is time is finite, right? There's only 24 hours in a day. So thinking through how people spend discretionary dollars and how they spend their time is really important. So in order to rise above from a value proposition standpoint, yes, of course, for a video game, it's okay, why is this video game worth your time and money more so than any other video game? But then also at the end of the day, why is it also worth more of your time than Stranger Things is, right? So it's a much different value proposition now than it has been in years past.
Value proposition. You sound like a marketer. Isn't that like marketing?
I know.
Shout out to Gavin.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with PR becoming more closely aligned with the business. You start to take on marketing terms. It's a virus. Don't do it, people. Don't do it.
Ooh, this is kind of off the Q&A sheet that I shared with you, but I'm not sure if you saw this, but I'm deeply obsessed with a report that came out from USC about how public relations as a practice, or the term public relations, is going to continuously be sucked under and integrated more and more with marketing, and it may not exist sort of on its own. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, actually. No, it's really interesting. I think in the past, public relations has always been seen as an offshoot of marketing. It's just another discipline that marketing potentially funds and then leverages as a way to keep the trains moving. In reality, the organizations in which I've worked, where I've seen public relations have the most sway, is where they actually report directly to the CEO or another C-level executive, right? So in that way, PR is seen as strategic peer to marketing, because what we're doing is taking a marketing message, right? So if PR is seen as an offshoot of messaging, then effectively all that we are doing is translating ad copy and commercials and then pumping that out to media. Well, there's no need for that. Watch the commercial, read the ad. We're trying to tell a much more nuanced narrative to a certain consumer, business, whomever, in a way that is communicated via third-party advocacy, in this case, media or influencers, right? So there is still value to that, separate to what marketing may spend above the line for a TV campaign, et cetera. So, and the other thing too that could be a danger is if public relations or communications sits under marketing, then we effectively become a vehicle to communicate the marketing. So some of the message about the product or service is lost, when in reality we end up just talking about marketing campaigns, which I would argue does a disservice to the ultimate product and service, and also to the intelligence of the consumer base, right? They want to know, why is this product willing to invest equity in learning about your product or service? Why not actually give them opportunity to make a choice about that, rather than, oh, hey, have you seen this cool new ad?
Hey, have you seen this cool new ad? Yeah, that's basically it. Gosh, I have so many more questions about that, but maybe I'll take those on another date with you. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think a lot of my students are, they're just getting started in the public relations programs here. So a lot of questions about, what does a typical day look like? What are some of the things that you do? And, I know typical day is probably hard to clarify, but what would you say some of those tasks might be?
I would say any PR ever industry in which they're working, the first thing that they do as soon as they either wake up or get in the office. So find your favorite publications, anything that deals with trends, anything that's pertinent to the work in which you're doing, anything that broadly speaks to interest for you. I think because as PR people, we have to be the ultimate, not necessarily arbiters, but we have to understand everything that's going on at all the time. So better understanding not only media trends, but also pop culture trends, what people are talking about, in what context they're talking about them. Is there applicability to your product or service? Are there any dangers for your potential product or service? If any of you are, following anything regarding video games, there's just a lot that there are of course a number of things that deal with video games, product, services, reviews, et cetera. But there's also a lot of just adjunct conversation about video games. Luckily, we have a really great body that advocates for us, just generally, called Entertainment Software Association, and they do a fantastic job. But again, there is legislature, there's FCC, there's all kinds of other things that are happening in the space, which we as PR practitioners need to be up to date, because going back to it becomes really tough to craft an effective strategy or plan around your product, service, whatever, if you don't have a really good what's going on just broadly in the media landscape. So I think that's key to any person's day, sort of first thing. Moreover, from there, I mean, to your point, there's not really anything that is traditional. A lot of what I do and have done is continuing to refine plans. So those are what we like to call living documents, right? So you do a plan once, you continue to reassess it. You look at tactically what you need to be doing. Always good to reach out to and contact media folks. I mean, that's that remains the lifeblood of what we do, making sure that we have relationships with media, influencers, etc. I, again, work at a company. So when you work in-house, always making sure that you're touching base with your various constituents. So whether that be marketing team, sales team, social team, just getting a sense of what they're seeing as well is always really interesting because, again, as we continue to strive to be seen as strategic partners within any business, it's important that we better understand those internal pain points as well. Those are almost as important as what's going on externally. So being able to understand, quickly synthesize, and then make a recommendation on the back of those, I think is relatively important. And then from the depending on what you're doing. But I would say, the core of any sort of first quarter of any PR person's day is just taking time to read.
Yes, I love this. It matches so nicely with our assignment that they're doing right now, which is every week they're looking for any news article that they're interested in, and then using Cision to pull a coverage report around that company or that organization. So we always start each class by sort of talking about like who's in the news and looking at it really from a public relations standpoint. So yay, I'm glad that's something that they're going to do on the job.
Yeah, no, that's good. Another fun exercise is determine whether or not it was pitched by a PR person or picked up organically by media.
Ooh, did you guys hear that? We actually had a question tonight. Somebody asked me if we were going to talk about pitching, and I said, well, not specifically in this class, maybe a little bit later on. So I might bring you back for that. You can talk about pitching.
Yeah, no, I would love to. It's actually a ton of fun. I mean, I think one of the misnomers in PR is that media are these big like troll like bugbears, right? And it's like they're just people trying to do a job. So I think establishing a rapport, better understanding. I think the key is, again, goes back to reading is better understanding. Well, what are they interested in? What do they cover? And then being able to tailor. We won't even call it a pitch. Tailoring the conversation to those sort of things, I think, is important. But not to.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely about relationship building, right? And I saw that so much with my internship with you guys. Like, it's just talking to people. Like, they're people, they're humans. And I don't know that we necessarily teach that in public relations programs, but hopefully through experience working on projects and working with clients that they learn a little bit about the relationship building. That's my hope anyway.
Well, I think so. And I think, if I had to give one piece of advice on the media front, it's you made a great point. See media as people with interests, bills, et cetera, more so than a means to an end. And I think that actually helps to better level some of that playing field or better understand some of those, I guess, if you want to call them pain points that the media folks are dealing with as well.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the stereotypes about public relations. I always love, I showed this clip from Sex and the City with Samantha and Lucy Liu. I don't know if you ever watched Sex and the City, but it's a great clip. I'll send it to you because it's like every unethical thing you could imagine. So what are some of your suggestions on how, not only as individuals, but really as academics and then as professionals in the industry, how do we combat the negative stereotypes associated with public relations?
Again, I think first and foremost, it is be as the best subject expert that you can be on whatever it is that you're working on, talking about. I mean, one of the probably worst PR on smiling.
Sorry, you cut out a second. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that we're just smiling and dialing, reading from a script without any deep understanding for what it is.
Wait. Hold on. Smiling and dialing?
Yeah.
It's good. Write that down, guys. Yeah. Smiling and dialing.
Yeah. Reading from a script, whereas, I find the best PR people are the ones that actually have more than a passing knowledge of what it is that they're pitching at the end of the day. On a number of different products, a number of different accounts if you're working on the agency side. But just what it is that you are ultimately talking about to media, I think goes a long way toward dispelling some of those myths. Further, I think it is kind of what we were talking about before, in terms of interacting with media is rather than treating it like transactional, it's a way to build a rapport, better understand what they're working on, better understanding what makes sense for their publication, and then tailoring your pitch from there. And I think furthermore, it's just a sense of honesty and integrity. You know, I've had media call me and say, hey, I don't have a lot of time. Is this really newsworthy? And I've said no before, just because I don't want them to spin wheels on something that will impact our relationship down the road. Those relationships moving forward.
Lost you again. It might be my signal.
Better?
Oh no.
Still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. All I was going to say is I can't underscore the importance of those relationships, because media, I mean, again, like those relationships will last from job to job, and it's just really important to cultivate those relationships and really act honestly and really make sure that you're well read on what it is that you're ultimately pitching or working on.
Do you ever use the word spin when you talk about what you do?
I try not to.
Yeah. Okay. Me too. Just checking.
Right. Well, I think, and going back to challenges quickly, I think the toughest part of our job is actually remaining positive on something that you know is not great. Right. I would say probably the easiest jobs in the world are working on really good products. Something that's truly innovative, and we use that term interchangeably for anything at all times, right? But things that you truly believe in, that you're truly passionate about. Whereas if you're working on something like, oh, I'm not so great, being able to still come up with a compelling strategy and plan to be able to take that to market. Ultimately, these products and services have to stand on that, right? Each product does not get shipped with a PR person or an engineer, right? Like they're ultimately going to have to stand, they're going to have to stand on the strength of what they do. So again, our job is to put whatever it is that we're working on in the best position to ultimately succeed based on the strategy that we conceived before. After that, we've done all we can do.
Mm-hmm. I like how you put that. Very good. Okay, so last question here is, what are 3 skills you think that public relations students really need for their first job?
Right all day.
Anything in particular?
No, I mean, I think really it's any kind of writing, and it's not, I know people are going to tell you probably to write a ton of press releases and that sort of thing. Like, probably not. Hopefully press releases are dying a slow death, just because I think there are probably more compelling ways to communicate information. But whether it's creative writing, whether it's short form pitches, whether it's just informational, again, the exercise that you were talking about in terms of what did you read and what did you think about it, any of that, any sort of writing exercise is really important, because you're going to be doing a lot of it, and it's not necessarily, some of it will be official writing, whether it's website copy or press releases or blog posts. Some of it will be informal in terms of emails to media or other folks that you're working on. But the ability to be concise, make a point, be compelling is extraordinarily important, and I can't underscore the importance of that enough. Just because, especially now more so than ever, so much of our communication is via written word, right? So the number of emails we send and receive is increasing exponentially. So the ability to, again, not only stand out when you're speaking with media, but also to really be persuasive to your client or other counterparts, I think is really important. To go down the rat hole, but
sorry, you cut out again.
Sorry.
It's funny, you start to say something, and then it's just like your lips are moving and there's no sound.
It was a really good point.
Sure it was. We'll quote you a lot.
Yeah, great. Reading, again, just keeping up to date, whether that's via RSS feed or your kind of top 4 or 5 websites, or even picking up a newspaper, any of that sort of stuff is actually presenting.
Presenting? Okay.
Yes. So presentation skills goes along with a little bit of the persuasion I was talking about before. A number of times, whether you're actually presenting to PowerPoint slides, being able to give a really cogent opinion on strategy, being able to, again, really captivate a room, make a point, be persuasive, argue a point, all those things. Partner. News Vegan. That's it.
Lost you again.
You there?
There you go.
Yeah, I'm here. There we go.
Okay. So presentations, go ahead.
Yes, 100%. So just being seen as a strategic partner, to be able to compel a room, compel a client, compel someone in the media, just, again, really being able to get a point across and be a compelling presenter is something that I think is important for any PR person.
What about like working in teams? Do you have any advice as far as working in teams, doing teamwork? I know my students hate teamwork. They dread it.
One of the interesting things about PR people across the board, and I'm gonna generalize, so forgive me, is a lot of us have very A-type personalities, and so a lot of people just, I've got an idea, I'm gonna run with it, get out of my way. I think it's so important to be able to recognize the value not only of other opinions but also other experiences. Again, like I was talking about earlier, a lot of what we do is craft narrative. Some of that is lived, some of that is learned, but other people in our profession are really so good at being able to synthesize that in different ways. I think it's really important to be able to collaborate as and when we can, especially more so when you're looking at events, right? How do you pull together a really creative event? How do you think through something you may have not necessarily done before about engaging media?
Sorry, you cut out again.
That's all right.
This is funny every time. I don't know why.
Every time. It's just really important to be able to collaborate and use the kind of hive mind for a lot of the stuff. It doesn't mean that you, of course, need to take all this into account, right? But I find that it's always good to be able to talk to people, especially from different disciplines, to better understand what their pain points are, because there are some similarities there, but also some really great best practices.
Yeah, I like what you said about the different perspectives, because, people will think of things that you totally forgot about, especially with event planning, and then you're like, oh, yeah, right, napkins. We should totally have napkins. It's always the napkins in my case.
100%.
Okay, anyway, I'm going to open it up and see if any of my students have any questions. I'm going to try to show you their faces a little bit more so it's just not my big face in front of you. So let's see what happens here. Okay, anybody have any questions?
What's the last pitch you worked on?
Did you hear the question?
The last, what I worked on?
Pitch.
Oh, the last pitch.
Uh-oh.
I'm trying. It was actually right before I came to PlayStation. I was working at a robotics startup called SoftBank Robotics. If you have heard of Pepper, then I've done my job. If not, then sorry. So it's effectively a 4-foot tall humanoid robot that we were trying to sell into retail. And so rather than trying to sell or convince people to write about robotics, because that can be
what?
Scary if you think about robotics and AI.
Yeah.
It was placing in the context of a business problem, right? So we know that brick and mortar is in trouble, just given the dominance of Amazon. So as a retailer, how do you think through not only engaging your consumer in a really interesting way, but then being able to market in real time via this marketing platform that...
Oh, wait, what? Marketing platform, what?
So being able to market and then better understand consumer preferences in real time because they're conversing with this robot. Other than have people focusing on the fact that there is a 4-foot robot potentially in your store, it's more positioning it as a real-time marketing analytics platform. So some of what we do is changing the context in which people view your product or service and more closely aligning it with a business problem or pain point.
I like that, changing the context. I'll have to remember that. Changing the context.
Yes.
Take notes for me. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question. I feel like it's more like a marketing question.
Oh, ask him. He knows some marketing stuff, I think. Right, Chris?
A little bit, enough to be dangerous.
So with a company like PlayStation, what does your research look like when you're working on a project like Crash Bandicoot, and then you're also working on a project like Destiny, where there's two very different consumers for the products?
Sure.
Oh.
I think proprietary info. But I think a lot of it goes back to the point I was making earlier about understanding it's about understanding your existing consumer base, how they're behaving and what is of interest to them. But also two is, and again, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's understanding what your customer wants before they want it. And some of that is just based on trend data and how people are engaging. One, how people are purchasing games, but also two, how people are engaging with the games that they're purchasing. But moreover, are engaging with what's interesting from a pop culture standpoint, and then potentially extrapolating what people are going to want. All know that developing games is a multi-year process. So going to like and enjoy in 2 to 3 years.
What was that last part? We only got 2 to 3 years. We didn't get that.
Well, so the process of developing games is a long and complex process. And so effectively what you're trying to assess is what people are going to think is cool, what they're going to like, what's going to be on trend in 2 to 3 years from when you start.
You have to do some future predicting.
100%.
I have a question about kind of related to research, because that's my favorite thing ever. What kind of research have you either conducted or used for strategic planning? Specifically, I don't know if there's anything specifically you've done with research for public relations, but
not a ton for public relations. I mean, what we will tend to do is look at Nielsen data, which can kind of tell you on an ongoing basis, depending on how and when people are surveyed, how aided awareness changes, how unaided awareness changes, rating amongst the wearer. So, effectively, it's a really interesting way to potentially gauge how our efforts are working. From an awareness standpoint, but also from a rating standpoint. And if you're not familiar with Nielsen, effectively it's a survey tool that asks people, one, are you aware of this? So it'll give you a list of 7 things. So that will gauge aided awareness if your product is on the list. Unaided awareness is, write in a box what product you're really looking for. And then rating amongst the wearers on a scale of 1 to 10, tell us how great, cool, et cetera, you think this thing is. So the idea is, as we move through a PR campaign and do more tactically, awareness should increase, and hopefully if we're
hopefully what?
Rating will increase, right? Oh, I think this product is better the more I know about it. From a marketing standpoint, I mean, there's a ton, right? So you can do qualitative, quantitative, you can yeah, I mean, there's probably a million tools that you can use depending on what data you're looking for and what audience that you could do. But I think all of it provides really interesting insight, especially when you're planning.
True. Any last question? Yeah. Okay. One more question.
Was there ever a campaign that you worked on that didn't turn out the way you wanted it to?
Yeah, I just have to pick one. Yes, it happens all the time. I mean, again, to the earlier point, a PR plan needs to be a living document. So you may start out and announce a product and service, assess what the reaction, move on from there. And it may change what you do tactically. It may change what you do strategically. But, for instance, obviously, Stacey and I worked first together when we worked at LucasArts, and the game that she was alluding to earlier is a game called Fracture. And the big
we lost you.
The big selling point or gaming mechanic was the ability to move terrain up and down on the fly, right? So it gave you a tactical advantage, strategic advantage. You could solve puzzles with it, and the entire game was effectively predicated on this gameplay mechanic. So when you look at a product over and over and over again, you become really close to it, and you think this is really cool. People are going to love it, and then you take it to market, and people say, "eh." So, and at that point, if you have predicated all of your sort of equity on one selling point, and then the core consumer doesn't really care about it, then you don't have much to fall back on. So then from there, it's crisis comms, it's damage mitigation, it's figuring out, okay, how do we make sure that people don't kill it too badly in the market, and like those sort of concerns. So whenever because we're not necessarily involved with day-to-day production of a product and service, we're at the mercy of
we're at the mercy of
the product and how it performs.
Yeah, very little control. I'd be curious to know what so one thing that we talk a lot about, the academic, in the perfect world with public relations in our little closed bubble of academia, is this concept of like two-way communication. So like taking feedback back up. And so when you talked about public relations becoming more strategic and having a direct line of communication to the C-suite, do you see that happening in your particular industry? I don't feel like, from my experience, I don't remember that being a huge part of it, but I know in other organizations that I work for that feedback loop was immensely important and was something that everybody bought into. So I don't know kind of what the state of that is, or what that might look like in real life.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, and I know we've kind of been talking about communication from PR out to media, out to the market, but at the same time, we also have to be the front lines of media sentiment to the business as well. So, it's very much a don't shoot the messenger type of situation, right? Where if we come to the table and say, look, current media sentiment is X, Y, and Z. If we go out with this message, we're going to get hammered, or it's very likely consumers will think X, Y, and Z. And that has to be born of what we're seeing in the market and what we're reporting back, right? So that goes back to the point about just being really up on media trends, pop culture trends, et cetera, because you are going to have to make a recommendation, not in a vacuum, but in the context of what's happening all around us, right? And so I'll give an example. When I worked at Ubisoft, we were working on a shooter, and the development team wanted to put out this asset about, of course, shooting people, things, whatever, on 9/11. And we said, that would be a terrible idea. But the reason why it'd be a terrible idea is not because I personally find it a little bit abhorrent, but in the context of the media and consumer landscape in which we're looking to release this asset, there would be some significant impact on the brand, product, et cetera, right? So being able to then be that voice back to the business about what's going on in the current landscape that may cause you to change your strategy, approach, tactics, whatever it may be, is also critical.
Yeah. Do you find that sometimes that message is not welcome and they do want to shoot the messenger?
Often, yes.
Hey, but you're still standing, so.
I know I've got some scars and bruises, but no, again, I think a lot of what we have to do, and this is, a lot of what I tell my teams too, is don't don't come to the table with an I think or an I feel. Come with some empirical evidence. Hey, we want to go out to the market. Here are 3 recent articles that indicate X, Y, and Z that may run counter to what it is we're thinking. Hey, I was just in this forum and look at this 20 pages of outrage around X, Y, and Z. We should rethink this. So, there is a lot of depth to that as well. But again, being able to quickly and cogently be able to deliver that information to the business, I think removes a lot of subjectivity from the equation and more turns us into the voice of the market.
That's a really good tip. I like that. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Do you own a PlayStation, and if so, what's your favorite game?
The PlayStation.
You were cut out. I think you said you.
Oh, absolutely. I do own a PlayStation, and man, my favorite game of all time.
Yeah. Oh wait, favorite game of all time.
And I'm done. I'm joking. My favorite game of all time is a Rockstar game called Bully.
Oh. Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
No, we can't hear you.
The makers, the makers of GTA, made a game called Bully, and it was an open world game about you play as sort of this outcast kid who goes into this. It's a fun game, but people presume.
Man, the technology is just not on my side tonight.
It's not your friend.
No, it's not.
In reality, you were the anti-bully. You were effectively trying to unite these various factions in the school. So it was a really fun subversive game in its own right. But I love that they kind of tweaked a lot of the people that thought because the name of the game was Bully that you were going to play a bully.
Lovely. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for this. Sorry about the technology challenges, but
No problem.
Really appreciated you joining us. And if you are open to it, they might have some follow-up questions. And so I've told them they can use the Baird PR hashtag on Twitter and just ask their questions. And so if you don't mind, I might reach out to you about answering some of them.
I would love to.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Say bye, guys.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye. Wow. I mean, it was louder this time.